Hello, my friends. My name is Betsy, and today I decided to work on this drawing. As you can see, it's about halfway completed. So I wanted to take this opportunity to share with you a little bit of the process and some of the thinking that goes into how I place objects or how I put the elements in here to really create that layered effect. So if you have a little bit of time, I'd like you to join me so that we can draw together for a little while. But of course, before I even got started on this drawing, this cute little guy decided to show up on my desk and take over everything. So I have to give him a little bit of love for just a few seconds before I tell him to get off my desk so I can start drawing. So one of the things that I do whenever I get started here, so you can see here is that as I'm starting in this little blank area here, the very first thing that I do is I take my pen and I create a fairly thick black line around the edges of it. So what this is going to help me do is that once I fill it in, that very dark black line is going to remind me that I want to create a lot of shading there. So for me, the reason that I do this is that I really want to make things look like they're layered. And the simple way for me to do this is to force some of these elements to fall further into the background. And the way to do that is to shade them darker. So you can see I'm even filling in some of the spots here with more black ink. This will help make it look darker. And so that way when I come in with some graphite, so that's what I'm doing right here, is I'm taking a pencil and I'm putting a lot of graphite there. I'm going to make it really dark. So there's quite a bit of shading, because for me, this area is definitely in the background. So I'm just going to blend that. And in the past, I used to leave some areas of this that were still pretty light, but these days I fill it in a whole lot to make sure it's really dark. And so what I'm moving on to right here is this area, which to me, when I created it, I wanted it to be in the foreground. So I really want this to pop. So I'm just coming in with some pencils. And I just got these pencils actually, so I'm just testing out to see how they work. I haven't had them for a whole lot of time. So I'm testing out how it layers, because I'm using two types of pencils at this moment. I think that blue one is a Faber Castell. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but I think that's what the blue one is. And the black one is actually from Blick Studio. So I'm just trying to see if they blend together well, and they do okay. They could do better, but they do okay. And so you can see that I'm moving on to this next area. And again, I'm doing that same thing again. I'm creating a thick black line. And it's a little bit rough going to the edge of the page, so I'm going to avoid doing that this time. I'm just going to do that area. And I'm just going to draw these little, I'm not sure what to call them. They're like these little droplets with a little dark spot in the middle. It almost makes it look like little loops of yarn to me. There's actually a stitch that I used to do many years ago, which my mother taught me. And it's a crochet stitch that you pull a little bit of yarn and let it stick out, and then you do some kind of yarn magic, and you end up with this huge piece that just has all these little loops of yarn sticking out, and it's totally magical. This looks exactly like that. I'm so glad my mother taught me that stitch too. I made lots of cute things with that. And you see I filled in the rest with black. So again, my thinking here is that anything that's kind of receding into the background, I'm going to create some pretty deep shadows. And I think in this case, I just decided to use color pencils for those because they are in the foreground, so they have color. But the little edges, those corners where you saw me put black, those are receding into the background. So I'm going to make them pretty dark. And again, you don't have to do any of this. I'm just sharing with you the way that I do this. I'm sure everybody has all sorts of different methods to creating. It's just for me, I really love showing a lot of contrast. I love having really dramatic images where there are these huge, deep zones that are just almost entirely bathed in darkness. And so I love doing this a lot. You can see that I'm starting to fill in those edges with black ink again. So I'm making a nice, thick, dark line with the pen. If you have any other pens, like let's say you have a brush pen, you could probably use that here. It might help you create that a little bit faster. But I think I prefer just using the same pen for all of it. You can even see that I created this little dark zone just to help create more of a dark feeling in that area, because for me, all of these little patterns are in the background. So I'm just doing circles, lots of little circles. And then what I'm going to do once I'm done with the circles, I'm just going to come in with that graphite again and make it really dark. And what happens is that in person, it really doesn't look this dark. I think it's just the magic of the camera that really picks up on those dark hues. But still, I really love it looking like that. I love it when there's a lot of dark, a lot of ink and a lot of graphite or even charcoal. Sometimes I go and grab some charcoal pencils. And I am going to decide to go around the edge just because I'm trying to make sure that there's a little bit of cohesiveness with everything. So a lot of that ink is going to go right up to the edge of the paper. I try to avoid that often though, because if you've tried this, you try to draw on the very edge of the paper, it just ends up going all over the place. You end up with ink on the other pages. So I think if I had been a little wiser about this, I would have put a piece of paper there to keep the ink from ending up on the other pages. But that's okay. So as I move on to that next spot, I'm just deciding to do some lines. Trying to create a little bit of flow right there. You can see I'm already doing those thick lines around the edge to demarcate kind of the end of one region. So that looks pretty good right there. Again, I'm adding that dark black line. And then I'm just going to go and add more lines here. Sometimes I just keep it simple. I'm trying not to give myself too much stress or really worry too much about how it turns out. It's those dark lines that really help separate zones. Even if the patterns are pretty similar, it still creates more interest when I add those thick black lines in. So again, I'm just going to fill this in with some tangling. If any of you do Zentangle, you know what that is. It's just a whole lot of lines that kind of flow together. And so I'm coming in with some graphite. And then you can see that I'm switching here to something that's in the foreground now. So again, this shape, I had just previously decided that it was gonna be in the foreground. So I'm just starting with a little bit of black colored pencil. And then I chose a bit of a deeper blue to go over that. I'm just trying to create a gradient here. And then after that, I'm trying out some of that new pencil that's more of a lighter blue to create that gradient. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to leave the center of that without any color at all. I'd rather just not color that area so that way it looks like it's a highlighted area, like it's a little bit shiny. I tend to be pretty messy when I'm using pencils. Which I'm going to add a piece of paper here because I don't want it to smear the other page. And so while I'm doing this, I don't know if any of you do this, but at this stage, I'm very quick to start pressing hard. And I forget what the word for that is. I think it's called burnishing. Yes, I believe that's the word. Correct me if I'm wrong, if any of you know. But when you use the color pencil and you press really hard, it's called burnishing. And what it does is it really fills that area with all of that wax and the color, and it makes it look like a nice solid smooth color. And so that's what I do there. So I decided to move on to this sphere here. I'd actually been avoiding it for a good while just because it was kind of daunting. So I wanted to create these little scales here. And the hardest part for me is starting at the very bottom there. So as you see, I used my pencil to create these guidelines. What they are, they're actually contour lines. And I'm going to use those contour lines to help me set up those scales. And so when I start in the corner, they're very, very tiny, absolutely tiny. And as I start working my way up, I'm allowing those scales to get just a little bit bigger, and I'm using those guidelines. This is probably one of the toughest parts of this drawing. It takes such a long time to try to get the illusion of a sphere, which is exactly why I was putting it off. But the result is just so satisfying, so I finally decided to come in and do that. So as you can see, the actual pattern that I'm using is I start with this little loop and I color it in black, and then I draw another loop over the top of it. You'll probably start to notice that those loops in the heading towards the center of the sphere, those are much wider and larger, whereas the ones around the outer edge of that sphere are longer and thinner. And this is what's helping create that illusion. So you'll see those are wide. That one at the end was much thinner. And that's because I'm using those contour lines. I'm using those guides to show me where it is that I need to put each one of these scales. So I'm just coloring that first part in and then drawing the line over the top. And as you can see, this can take a little bit of a while, but it's already starting to look like it's spherical. So that's good to me. I've tried this a handful of times, and every single time it's challenging for sure. It is not easy. So if you try something like this, just know it's going to require some patience, but it is very rewarding. So here I'm just trying to maintain that same pattern. If there's anything that I've learned from drawing this way, is that I really do have to be patient. Sometimes I get impatient and I just walk away, and that's okay too if I just don't have it in me. I come back on a different day and I just pick up my pen and do a little bit at a time. And so that's what I'm doing here. Just trying to follow the logic. The ones in the center are bigger, the ones around the outside just get smaller. And I know that when I'm doing this, it's just so nice to allow my thoughts to clear, to just have a moment of peace and just think that I'm creating order. There's a little bit of chaos here, but I'm creating just a bit of order, and my thoughts can do the same thing. It gives me just a moment to organize my thoughts and to remember that everything is okay, that even though there might be things that I have to do that day, that I can just sit for a little while and just relax. And I can put some ink on the paper, and I'm going to try to draw a sphere, and maybe that sphere will not come out perfect, and it's okay. It's just so much fun looking at how just some lines, just some ink. I haven't even put any graphite on here. How some ink on a paper can create all these illusions. How our eye picks it up and thinks, oh wait, is that a sphere? And then you have to stop and think, oh no, that's a piece of paper. That's flat. Makes me think a lot about how our perception is guided by the input that we receive from our senses. You can see that I'm reaching the end here, and there's just this little space because there's another sphere in front of it, and I'm just doing my best to fill that in. And you can see that I'm moving on and creating that dark line there again. I do it every time. If anything, I would say that that's kind of my secret. It's my secret weapon to creating a lot of layers and a lot of intense drama, I suppose. Sometimes I feel like my drawings are very dramatic. And so here I'm finally coming in with some graphite. There's an area there that I hadn't filled in. And then finally I come in along the edges So I'm just trying to think of logically where there might be some shadows. I don't know if I'm doing this perfectly. Some people might be cringing at the way that I shade, but this is what works for me. So I just go around the edge and then I blend it, just make it a little bit smooth. Just helps it out a little bit. I'm not thinking at all about whether I have a light source or not. I just make a shape and I shade around the edges. That's all I'm doing. So as I move on to this sphere here, you saw that I created some contour lines that are curved, almost like a marble. And I'm just starting by adding, I think this is a violet, a soft violet. And to start giving a little bit of depth, I'm only adding color on the edges and leaving that center without color. So this is a tendency of mine. I tend to do this no matter what the shape is, whether it's a sphere or if it's a round or anything like that. So then I'm following that up with some black. With this one, I'm also experimenting. I don't really know if these pencils blend very well. They kind of don't, because these are two brands of pencils. Again, it was the Faber, is that how it's pronounced? Faber-Castell? Golfaber. That was one color, and then the black pencil was a Blick Studio. I tend not to buy pencils in packs. That's why I have so many different types. I tend to buy them from the open stock, so sometimes the stores around here, if you live in the US like I do, you can go to art stores like Michael's, and they'll have pencils often that are just, you can buy one or two pencils, and that's what I do. Whenever I have a little bit of money, I'll wait for a sale, and I'll just go pick up maybe 3-4 pencils. And so that's how I have my collection. I've got all sorts of different things there. And so what I'm adding is just another layer of color because I think I want it to pop just a little bit more. And it's helping. It doesn't have to be perfect though. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm just kind of creating an illusion here. So I think that I might just add a little bit more. I'm going to find a softer pink just to give me more of a gradient. Let's see if that helps. Okay, that's pretty good. Sometimes if I just leave the edges the way they are, I'm not happy with them. So I just try to find a softer color to help me blend that in. So again, I'm burnishing right there. I'm pressing pretty hard. And I can go over the rest of it too, because it's such a soft color. And as you can see, what it helps me do is it helps me spread out that color so that it doesn't look so grainy. And that helps a bit. I'm happy with that. So I think what I'm just going to do is move on to this area over here. And I'm just going to start by coloring in this long, thin form that's in the foreground. And after trying out a few shapes, I think that the best option is to just start with the black. And then I can start burnishing over the top with that with a lighter color. So in this case, it's that blue again. And I'm mostly sticking to the same colors for the whole drawing. It's my choice that I only want about 3 colors in here. I don't want to just use everything. I'm trying to see what it looks like when I just use those. And I think I'm just going to fill this in black. It's just this tiny little area and it's too tight for me to try to put any patterns in here. So I'll just fill it in black. But I think this one is big enough. And I am going to add just a little bit of something, so I'm just going to do the edge. And I think because it is a little bit tight now, so the space is kind of small now, I'll just fill in the edge. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do some scribbling. Some of you may have seen me do this if you watch any of my time-lapse videos on Instagram. I just scribble. It's a really easy way to get some texture into a zone. So after scribbling, I'm just going to add some graphite to make it darker. And so I think I'm just going to move on to this area here. And I'm going to do my usual dark black line. which again, it's really going to set the tone. It's reminding me that that region that I'm working in is in the background. And I think I'm just going to do some simple tangling here. So again, these are just lines that flow together. In a sense, it almost looks like it's hair. Or sometimes to me it looks like it would be like the texture of water as it's moving around. So now that I have that done, I'm going back in with graphite. So whatever pencil you have will work fine for this. I tend to use the really soft one. So that pencil in particular that I have that you see me using a lot, that one is called it's by Generals. It's called a Layout Extra Black pencil, and I'm going to do my best to link everything in the description for you guys. It's the Generals Layout Extra Black number 555. And you don't have to get this pencil. If you happen to have a set of pencils, like a sketching set, this pencil is equivalent to the softest one in the set, which is usually, I think, a 6B or something like that. But if you don't have any of these, don't worry about it. Just use your regular pencil. I often just use like a Ticonderoga, my favorite HB2 pencil, and it works great. Just in this case, I'm kind of in love with this extra black pencil, and it works great. So here you can see that I'm coloring. This is another shape that's in the foreground. So for me, my idea was that this is going to have some color, but I'm just going to start off with that black colored pencil. So after doing the black in those corners, because it's going to be pretty dark there, I move on to that lavender color. I'm going to see what it's called. I have it here somewhere. So this is again that Faber-Castell. I don't think it shows a name of the color. It just says it's number 134. I guess they don't name their colors. That's interesting because the Blick Studio pencils does name them. They definitely have names on them. And for some reason I just decided to add a little bit of blue on there because why not? Let's see what happens. A little bit of experimentation. It turned out all right. So then I only have a few regions left in this drawing. And so I'm coming over here and just filling in. Once I'm in this area, I try not to complicate things because I've already added in so much interest in the shapes that I used in the foreground that for the background, where it's going to be darker, I just keep it to simple lines, just trying to make it have some flow. So the lines are often curved, and just simple circles like the ones that I'm doing here. And as I go towards the outer edges of the shape, the circles get smaller, and towards the center of that shape, the circles are just a little bit bigger, which again helps give that illusion of shape or form. And as usual, I'm going to come in with some graphite, darken it up. Now, one thing that I can tell you is that if you're drawing something and you want to create some depth like this, there is actually something else that you can do, and it won't require a pencil in the slightest. If you only have a pen and nothing else, what you can do to create darker areas, what you can do to create that depth is to use your pen to do that. And you can do that two different ways. And although I'm not doing it in this drawing, I do it often in many other drawings. So what you do is you can add some stippling. So again, it adds more ink to certain areas. Or you can make thicker lines. So if I wanted to, right here where I'm drawing these, in that area where the lines converge, I can go back in and add more ink and make it just a little darker in those areas. But because I'm not doing that here, what I'm choosing to do is to just go grab a pencil and add graphite to create that dark area. So you have lots of options. I'm just going to scribble this area in pretty quickly. And as usual, I will follow it up with some graphite. Make it even darker. Because the truth is that sometimes I don't just want to fill the areas in with black. I almost want to fill them in with black. So that's the closest I can do. Is I'll just scribble it in. And honestly, I'm surprised that I don't finish off a pen each time I do one of these drawings. These pens that I'm using, they last quite a while. And I know some people have been asking me which pens I use, and I'll make sure to link those in the description this time. And it will be an affiliate link to my Amazon recommendations, because these pens are actually pretty inexpensive. It's just a gel pen. It's a ballpoint pen. And they do pretty well for the most part. I've gotten a few duds in the packages, but the price turned out to be pretty good. I was actually really happy with them. I found a pack of 30 of them, and it cost, I believe, $6. Hopefully the price hasn't changed. I bought these a few months ago, and I have not finished those pens. So easily one of these can last me maybe a week. About a week or two, depending on how much I draw, of course, which is pretty good for me because I tend to use up pens so much faster. I wonder why, right? Especially with the way I keep filling in areas like that. All black. So having said that, these pens do work really well. So I'm pretty happy with them. And so I'm reaching this last region, and I don't think I want to fill it in entirely in black, so I'm going to create a little separation here. And I think I'm just going to do some tangling here. So I'm going to draw these wavy lines. Create some flow back there. But then because it's in the background, again, I'm going to add a whole lot of graphite to make sure that it gets nice and dark right there. It's almost like I just want there to be a subtle shapes there. And there's just this one space left, and rather than simply filling it in with black, I'm going to create these two little faint forms right there. I think I just feel uncomfortable leaving wide areas filled with black. And as I finish filling that up, this is pretty much the last section of the drawing. I have been using a pen. I have been using graphite, so just a regular pencil. I've used some color pencils, and that's it. I actually did not use anything to create highlights in this one. I'm going to go back and add some graphite to some areas that I forgot to shade in. So that's this right here, this flower sort of shape, just to create a little bit more depth. And some of those shapes at the top also need some graphite, so I'll just finish filling those in right now. Sometimes I do that. I jump around a lot, and that's fine. And what you saw me use there as well was a Faber-Castell eraser. I think it's called the Perfection. And it's an eraser that comes in a pencil form. I got one of these years ago, and I actually turned out to use it a whole lot. So it's really nice for getting into those little tight spots to erase things when you're not so happy with it. So here it is. There's the end result. It was a lot of fun. These are definitely the kind of drawings that I enjoy the most. There's just so much going on there. It's kind of this wild area, and it reminds me a lot of, I would say biology, but it isn't only that. It reminds me of physics a lot. If any of you know me, you know that that's a big thing for me, is I think a lot of the laws of physics, and I think about how these different forces are interacting together. And this is just one of my own fun ways of showing my love of science and physics. A lot of particles and particle physics happening here, at least for me. It also kind of looks like a lot of life forms in the ocean. So This is the end result of, I think it was about 3 or 4 hours of work. So I hope that you enjoyed this, and I am very glad that you joined me for this one. It was a lot of fun, and I hope that you also created something beautiful while you watched me draw. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next one.